Okay, everybody, wow. Hazak Baruch. Thank you everyone for coming. Beautiful turnout. Tabach Shema. All praises to Hashem, all thanks to Hashem. Really amazing. You know, before we even begin, there are a couple of tzaddikim that I want to give credit to, that they helped sponsor tonight's class. They sponsored with the food, they sponsored with their time, they said, you know what? I want to be part of what we're growing here. I want to be part of what we're building here. So I want to say, in the beginning, just a few names. Firstly, the Shiur is sponsored by Eitan Cohen. He sponsored Refuah Shlema Esther Bat Ilana. She should have a full Refuah Shlema. Sponsored for Hatzlacha of Liav Ben Metal. He should have a lot of Hatzlacha in his business and health, happiness, Baracha, Hatzlacha. And then we have Rafael Menachem Ben Chana for Hatzlacha. We're also sponsoring part of this class. Baruch Hashem. All the guys from this class, so Baruch Hashem, they're contributing, they're in it. So it's a big thing. And last but certainly not least, Refuah Shlema, Rosa Bat Chana Valentina. And in honor of my wife, Chana, whose birthday is coming up soon. So she's like, you know what, I want to sponsor the last class. And it's very special because you know what? Sheli v'shelachem shelai. Everything that we come and we're mehazek and we learn Torah, it's all because of my wife. Everything is. Because she contributes, she gives me chizuk, he gives me the ability to come, to learn, to grow with everyone here. So if ever you've benefited from a piece of Torah, a shtickle of Torah, if you ever had chizuk, it's my wife's credit. So, Baruch Hashem, she was also the big sponsor of the class. So thank you, everyone. As a side point, at the end of the Shiur, we're going to give away a new ke'ara, a Seder plate. Okay? So, B'ezrat Hashem, you come, you stay after the class, after Arvit, we're going to give away a ke'ara. And then, we have kits for Bidikat Hametz, the mitzvah that we do on Erev Pesach. How are you? To go and to look around, do a search in the home of 10 pieces of chametz. Going to give a raffle away a couple. I have 3 of them. So B'ezrat Hashem, stay after the class. Don't run away. After Meir, we're going to go and do the raffle. So my friends, we're holding. Let's make a bracha first. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niya b'dvaro. Can everyone hear me in the back? No, you got to come closer then. I got to talk louder. I can't scream. All right. So, my friends, we're holding a week from Passover, a week from the Chag of Pesach. In exactly 1 week's time, we're going to go to Knis, we're going to go to Shul, we're going to pray Mincha, we're going to pray Arvit, and we're going to come home, and we're going to start Leil HaSeder. It's presumably one of the most anticipated nights of the year, not only for kids, not only for adults, but for everyone on every level. It's a night when we accept everyone to come and ask questions. A night when we come and we accept everybody to go and intrigue ourselves in what are these customs that we call our own. What is this tradition that every year we go through and we read the same text, but every year I'm expected to grow from it? You know, there's a famous question that how can I express my individuality inside a religion that preaches almost uniformity? In a religion that preaches that we all pray the same way, that we all dress in a certain way, that we all have customs that are all very much aligned, but yet I'm supposed to express me. And I think the way we answer that question, one of the secrets lies in Leil HaSeder. Because Leil HaSeder, the night of the Seder night, is not just to go and tell the story that was. It's not just to tell the way our parents and our great-grandparents, they left Egypt, a story from slavery to freedom. But it's to specifically find where we lay in the story of Seder. Where do we find ourselves in the Haggadah that we tell over? You know, if you ever looked at your life and you've ever wondered, what's going on here? How are things and why are things going the way they are? Sometimes there's challenges and there's bumps in the roads and there's difficulties that come along the way, and we ask ourselves, if I had only started earlier, if I had only done this in my life, if I'd only made that decision differently, then maybe this part of my life would be a little bit different. Maybe if I'd looked at something a different way, it started a little bit sooner, then maybe in my life I would have been in a different place, maybe a place that would have been better. When we look at life and we see that these challenges, they create pain points within ourselves, we say, you know what? We conclude ourselves that life is painful, that life can have challenges that hurt. But tonight, I want to come to a different conclusion. With Hashem's help, I want to not discount the fact that these are pain points because they can hurt. It's true. Life has challenges and things are difficult to get through. But I want to come out tonight with an idea that perhaps we're not seeing the full picture. Perhaps when we look at our lives and we ask these questions, perhaps the reason these questions only come up is because we're really only seeing half the story. Because we entered into it a little bit too late. Because we're looking at the picture not as a whole, but up to the point that we are today. So I want to start with the story of a great tzaddik. His name is the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar is one of the biggest mifarish in the Chumash. If you look at the Mikrot Gedolot, you'll see the Kli Yakar. He speaks about in all parts of the Chumash, and in different parashiyot, in different Chumash, in different books of the Torah. That's the Kli Yakar. But who was he? His name was Rav Shlomo Ephraim Lunchitz. Rav Shlomo Ephraim Lunchitz, he grew up in a town that was adjacent to Prague. Now we know, anyone do the Poland-Prague trip, we know that the greatest rabbi of Prague, who was he? The Maharal mi-Prague, right? So he grew up in a town just outside of Prague. Now Rav Shlomo Ephraim Lunchitz, he was very poor. His parents, they were parud me'od, they were very poor. They could barely afford the food that was on their table, that was on their plates. And it came a point that his father, Rav Aaron, he had no choice. He had to go and he had to work in the pub that was owned by a non-Jew. See, back in the day, back in the times of the Maharal, Jewish people, they weren't allowed to own land. You know, people say, oh, the Jewish people, they're always in finance. They're always in the banks. They're always doing something related to the money, right? But the reason that is because they weren't allowed to own land, they weren't allowed to own businesses, and they weren't allowed to do the things that put them ahead of anyone else that they had to work for. So they had no choice. They had to work for landowners. They had to work for the pirates. They had to work for people that was able to sustain them. So Rav Aaron had no choice. He couldn't open up his own business. So he said, you know what? Let me go work for the local pub. And he started working for the local pub. He was in charge of ordering the booze, ordering the wine, the liquor, the whiskey, whatever it was. That was his job, to serve it to the people, to serve it to those who came into town, and make them bisimcha. That's what, the happier he made them, the more he had in his pocket. That's what it was. The wheel of fate turned, and people stopped buying. His fortune turned to the opposite. He stopped making money, and he was no longer able to pay the pirates his share in the land. He was no longer able to pay his share of the rent. And so the pirate says, you know what? You're not keeping up your end of the deal. I'm going to throw you and your wife in prison. And so he throws Rav Aaron, the father of the Kli Yakar, and his mother, the Rebbitzin, into prison. Now, prison back in the day, it wasn't like prisons today. Today you have yard time. Today you have meals, you have jobs, you have education. Back in the day, prison was a hole in the ground. And if they remembered to feed you, it was a good day. That was prison back then. They threw Rav Aaron and his wife in a hole, and that's where he lay. That's where they lay. It came time that Rav Aaron, he got sick. He got sick over a long time of being in such wretched conditions, and he died in prison. And after a short while, the mother was already pregnant with the Kli Yakar, and she gave birth. And at the birth of the Kli Yakar, she passed away during childbirth in the hole in the ditch of the prison. And this is what it was. And the Kli Yakar, he started crying. Rav Shlomo Ephraim, he started crying in the prison. And one of the guards, he overheard. He goes and he sees there are 2 Jews dead and 1 baby lying on the floor crying. And so one of the guards says, you know what, bring me that baby. This guard was trying to have his own children, but he was unsuccessful. So he's like, you know what, I'm going to take this child, the Kli Yakar, and I'm going to raise him as my own. This boy, this precocious scholar, he was very gifted. He was very gifted in his learning ability. But he grew up in Christian schools. He ended up learning about all the things that he wasn't supposed to learn about. Avodah Zarah, the Chagim of the Goyim. And this is where he was. He grew up in the home of a non-kosher home. Didn't eat kosher, grew up in Christian schools, learning idol worship. This is what it was. He grew up in the home of the guard who pretended to be his father. After a while, the Kli Yakar, he turns a nice, humble age of 5-6 years old. And he gets a dream. And who comes to him in a dream? His father, Rav Aaron. He says, son, the man that you are living with, he's not your real father. I am your father, and I passed away before you were born. Your mother, she died at childbirth. You are meant to be a scholar in Torah. You're meant to go and learn and teach Torah. This is your mission. This is what you were put here in this world to do. Go and ask him. He'll tell you everything. And the Kli Yakar, he wakes up from this dream, and he goes to the parts. He goes to this guard, and he says, Abba, father, I had this weird dream. Some man came to me, and he said, that you're not really my father, that I was given up, that my parents were abandoned, they were left to die. Is this true? And the father, he turns aghast, he turns red. He says, of course it's not true. Maybe you had too much candy, whatever it was, whatever you believed, whatever you were listening to, it's just a dream. Whatever you ate last night, don't eat it again. It's not true, get it out of your head. I'm your father, I raised you, you're living in my home, and you are my son. And this is the way it's going to be. The Kli Yakar, he goes back to bed. And the Kli Yakar, he has another dream. And this time again, it's Rav Aaron, his father. But this time his father's not so happy. He says, son, you should know that you were brought to this world to light up the nations. You were brought to this world for a specific purpose, and just know that if you don't go and fulfill your purpose, your time in this world, your days are numbered. He says, if you really want the truth, you want the emes, you'll run away from this home and you'll go to the next town, to the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Loi. Go to the Chacham, tell him who you are, and have him accept you as his Talmud. And that's what he did. He goes and he runs away from the Partz's home, and he goes to the door of the Maharal. He knocks on the door of the Maharal of Prague. And he says, listen, Rabbi, this is the dream that I had. This is the story. Here's my background. I'm actually Jewish. Would it be okay if you take me in? And the Maharal, he looks at him, he tries to understand, is he real, is he faking, is it a real story, is it not? He comes to the conclusion that this boy's legit, and this boy is being sincere. And so he takes him in. He takes him in and he starts teaching him Torah, Chumash, Mishnah, Gemara, the whole 9 yards. And the boy's excelling. He sees that this boy is very smart. He's really growing in a way that he'd never seen before. But then he hears signs that the parts from the previous town, he's looking for his son. He's not just going to let him go without a fight. And so he's sending his friends all around the town, where's my son? Where's my son? Where's my son? Where's my son? The Maharal gets wind that the Paritz is looking for his son. So he says, you know what? Go to the town called Lvov. Go to that town, go to the yeshiva, put yourself in the yeshiva over there. But don't give yourself away. Don't ask too many questions. Don't show yourself to be a scholar. Because the more you give up of yourself, they're going to start asking where you come from, where's your background, who are your parents. Go, lay low, learn in the yeshiva, and just be there. And that's what he did. He went to the yeshiva, he would lay low during Seder, and at night he would go and learn and steig in his room alone in private when no one would see. And this is how he grew to be a Talmid Chacham, the Kli Yakar. This is how it was. Many years went by, the parts never found him. But it came a time where the Maharal Prague, he passed away. But before he passed away, the Chevra Kadisha, they went to go and get the last will and testament of the Maharal Prague. And they say, Rabbi, who's going to replace you? Prague is a crown jewel of Torah Jewry here in Prague. Without you, who's going to be your next successor? He says, if you go to the town of Lvov, you're going to hear of a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Ephraim, the wheat farmer. Rabbi Ephraim, the wheat farmer, the barley farmer. Now, why was he named that? Because his wife, for a parnasah, this is what she would do. She would go from merchant to merchant, from store to store, and this is what she would sell. Rabbi Ephraim Kasha was his name. Not kasha like a question. Kasha like the Russian way to say wheat. Barley, buckwheat, right? That's how you say it. Rabbi Ephraim Kasha is going to be my successor, says the Maharal Prague. So what do the Chachamim say? Like, listen, if the Maharal signs his name to this document, who are we to say anything otherwise? If the Maharal says that this is the rabbi that's going to succeed him, we're going to go. They go to the Lvov and they go ask around. Rabbi Ephraim Kasha, is he around? And they find this rabbi. He reads the paper, he sees the Maharal had passed away, he's about to pass away, and that he is called up as the main rabbi of Prague to be his successor. And he goes up and he says, listen, if the Maharal says it, this is what it must be. So he goes to the city of Prague and he's teaching and people see, the Maharal really knew who he was talking about. That this Kli Yakar, he grew up to be a tremendous Gaon in Am Yisrael. He wrote tens of Sfarim. His students we know for the Mifarshim of the Yalkut Reuveni, one of the big Mifarshim, he wrote tens of books. That was the Kli Yakar. And you know, it's funny, because the Pasuk in Parashat Vaikra, it says, Adam ki yakriv mikem korban ladonai. A person who wants to go and bring a sacrifice to Hashem, he's called Adam. Now, if you take the story of the Kli Yakar, how many times in our lives do we see a person that's sitting in front of us, and this person is not the expected version of the person that we expect to see? So for example, someone who never went to yeshiva, someone who never learned Torah growing up, someone who went to public school his whole life, but now all of a sudden he's going and he's teaching and he's leading and he's giving classes. And we say, hold on, that doesn't make any sense. How does A and B equal D? Or we see people that are up the chain in the command in the corporate structure in their business, and they say, hold on, he was just at the bottom just a year ago. And now he climbed his way all the way to the top. And we see that there's a dichotomy between the person he is, between a man and a woman that they are, and the person that we had expected them to be. How does that play out in reality? Why does that happen? And you know, if you look back at the Pasuk, it says, Adam ki yakriv mikem. Why didn't the Pasuk just say, ki yakriv mikem ladonai? A person who's going to go and bring a korban to Hashem. Specifically, he says the Pasuk, Adam. What is Adam? See, Adam is an interesting word, because Adam means man. But so does Enosh, so does Gever, so does Ish. All these different words, they all mean man. But specifically, the Torah uses the word Adam. What is Adam? See, Adam is a name that does not have plurality to it. For Gever, Gevarim, Enosh, Anashim, you can make a plural version for all the different types of word that mean man, except for Adam. And Adam is what Am Yisrael is called. Because Adam has a double meaning. And in reality, Adam, one can either be like Adama, like the ground, from whence we came from the earth and that's where we're going back. We could be like Adama, or we could be like Adameh, Adameh le'ilyon. We can look like God our Father in heaven, if we choose to. Ki yakriv mekem lamonai, korban lamonai. If we choose to make the decision to go and make a sacrifice, if we go and make the choice to say, you know what, within me lies something dormant that all I have to do is just tap into. It's not that it's not there, it's that I haven't reached into my own potential, my own soul, and said, you know what, this is the person that I'm going to expose. Because within all of us, when Hashem says that we are Adam, Hashem says that we are Adameh le'ilyon. We have the potential to be like the stars and the moon. But that's only if we make the decision and the cognizant realization that we are greater and we're capable of more than we ever have been before. But if all we see is the person that we are today, if all we see is the person that grew up in Catholic school, that grew up in public school, and I'm blaming the fact that my position is today on the background and the way I grew up, then you know what? I'll always be in that position. But if I'm a person who says, you know what? Excuses I'll put to the side. Out of my position, the way I grew up, it doesn't matter. The only choice that matters is the one that I make today, not the one that I had no control over. If I'm going to allow my life to be ruled by the decisions that I don't make, for everything that I accept, for every circumstance that I settle for, is a decision that I make myself. Because if I choose to not change it, I made the decision to keep it. And that's the way it was. The Kli Yakar, he had every excuse to just be who he was. Grew up in the house of the parrots, grew up in Catholic school, grew up serving a God that we call Avodah Zarah. But the Kli Yakar understood that there's something within him, and like all of us, that there's something that's dormant that just needs to be awoken in the right way. You know, the Torah teaches us, Tiz'aru min ha'anim. Be cautious, be wary of the poor people. Because from them, that's where Torah is going to come. The Torah is going to come from the poor people. Now, what does the Torah mean? The poor people that have no money? The poor people that don't have land? The poor people who don't know? There's a Gemara that says, En ani ele bidat. That how do you define an ani? How do you define a poor man? A poor man can be defined in many different ways. One of them is that he doesn't have money, he doesn't have riches, he's not wealthy. But another way to define a poor man is someone who lacks da'at, someone who lacks wisdom, someone who lacks knowledge. And the Torah teaches from them, those are the people from which Torah is going to come. You think that you're going to go and give kavod to the guy who has a lot of money. Give kavod to the one who's is a scholar in Torah. Give him kavod. Torah's teaching, give kavod to the one who doesn't even know Aleph Beis. Because from him lies a desire that if it's unlocked, I feel bad for you. Because he'll surpass you and everyone around you. Tiz'aru min ha'anim, from those who are poor from knowledge. And this made me think, what's the connection with Pesach? You know, during Pesach, we are doresh on the matzot. And the matzah is called lechem oni, poor man's bread. Now, one interpretation of poor man's bread is that the bread is poor in ingredients. It's just made of water and flour, nothing else. It's not allowed a leavening agent. It's not allowed spices. It's not allowed juice. That's matzah shira. We're not allowed to add anything to the matzah aside from flour and water. And that's why it's called lechem oni. But it's interesting because in the Haggadah, in the middle of the Seder, we do a step called yachatz, and we break the middle matzah. And again, one way to understand why we do yachatz is because we're splitting up the matzahs into two. One matzah, we look at it as the matzah of slavery. This is the matzah that we ate in Mitzrayim, that Paro made us eat. It was very satiating, it was very filling. We had no reason to eat more because matzah was very filling. We didn't need to eat anything more than that. But the matzah that we put away and we hide in the afikoman, that's by yachatz, when we hide it away, and we see it for much, much later, that's the matzah of Geulah. So you have the same symbol, the same sign, you have the same matzah. It's called lechem oni, but one represents slavery and one represents freedom. And so how do you have both? And I think the answer is like this. The Seder is called a Seder because it's an order. We have an order, Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachatz. We follow everything in exactly the way it ought to be. But really what the Seder is meant to represent in its depth is the fact that this represents our lives. Every one of our lives is represented in the Seder itself. And by Yachatz, when we break that middle matzah, there's a pivotal point there. It's, do I continue knowing that my life is always lacking? Do I continue the Seder knowing that half my life, whatever I don't understand, I accept, and whatever it is, I'm not going to accept? But to remember one thing, that by the end of the Seder we have a minhag, we have a custom, that the children, they go and they look for the afikoman. They go and they hide, they look for it, right? The adult, the parent, we usually hide the matzah under the pillow, behind the couch, whatever it is, right? And the children, they go and they look for it. The matzah that you find at the end of the Seder represents the clarity that one is going to have at the end of his life. See, clarity is not something that's necessarily gifted upon us when we're living in the moment, we're living in the situation. Because when we're going through struggle, we don't understand why it's happening. And we ask on it, we say, I don't understand. I feel like I'm in slavery. I don't know why this is happening. Why am I feeling like I'm going through the struggle? It's very difficult. But the Seder is teaching at this one point. Wait to the end. When it's revealed, when you bring back that bigger piece of matzah, you'll realize that your life was never broken. It was just a part of a whole. And just because you don't have the full story doesn't mean that your story is broken. That just because you don't have the full story, just know that it's going to be revealed when the time comes. The point of the Seder is to teach our children emunah and bitachon. To teach them that Hashem brought us out of Egypt, that God brought us out of slavery, that Hashem is matzilenu mikol adam. When everyone that rises up to destroy us, God is there to rescue us, to save us in every single situation. But Hashem also says that the clarity that you seek, the answers that you want, you're not going to get them now. You know, there's a famous mashal of a king, and he asks a famous tailor, a Jewish tailor, to make him a suit. And he says, you know what, here's all the fabric, take all the fabric, make me a beautiful custom suit, 3-piece, double-breasted, pinstripes and everything, right? He gets back the suit after 3-4 weeks of tailoring, and he's go back to the tailor, he says, hold on, I gave you way more material than this. He says, it must be that you stole some material, I want that material back. And he says, king, what do you mean? Every little bit of that material is in the suit that you're wearing. He says, I don't believe you. And so what does he do? He says, you know what, king, no problem, I'll prove it to you. He takes the suit and he starts to cut it. He starts to rip it open. He says, you know what, you want to see the material? Let me lay it out for you. I'll show you everything. And the king says, no, don't break it. Hashem says, you want to understand my ways? I have to restart the world. I have to take everything back to the beginning. He says, you really want to understand why the righteous suffer and why the wicked are prosperous in this world? Let me take you back to Tohu Vavohu. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because only when you enter from the beginning will you see the chronology. That when you start a Seder, you'll only see the tzafun in the end because you started from something. It's like someone who's watching a movie. I don't know, no one watches movies here. But let's say someone watches a movie, right? Your friend is there, he's in the movie theater, he's watching an Geschmack film, right? And then you have your friend, you're coming 30 minutes later. He's like, sorry, I couldn't find parking, we're in Manhattan Beach. He comes 30 minutes later, right? And he says, and he leaves 30 minutes early. He says, that was the worst movie I'd ever seen in my life. He says, what do you mean? You didn't even see the beginning, and you didn't even stay at the end. How are you judging on the quality of this film? You don't know anything about it. But that's exactly our lives. Our history, our story started 5,700 years ago. And we enter in the middle of this story. We enter in the middle of this history. And we expect to understand everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be. We enter late to the movie, and we exit before it ends. And we say, you know what? This movie doesn't make sense. I have questions. I have claims. And God is not saying that you shouldn't ask these questions, because you should. You should handle with these questions. Why do the righteous suffer? Why do the wicked prosper? Why do good things happen to bad people? You should ask these questions. The Mishnah and Avot, it promotes it. You should ask. But you should also be aware and be comfortable with the fact that there is no answer. Because that's what emunah really is. Emunah is to believe. I believe that God runs the world. I believe there's a hashgacha pratit. I believe that there's an order to the world that God runs. Bitachon is a higher level of emunah. Bitachon is a verb. That means I can believe that God runs the world, but I'm anxious. I can believe that God controls all part of my life, but yet I have security outside my door 24/7. A person can get to a level of emunah, but bitachon, it's inner work. Emunah is in the brain, bitachon is in the heart. It's not only believe intellectually that God has dominion over all parts of my life, but it's to actually live as though you really say it's true. That's the point of the Seder. The point of the Seder is to break that middle matzah. And you leave the smaller piece on the table to understand that that's our lives. Our lives are the smaller piece. And you know when we take out the bigger piece by afikoman, the kid brings it out. Why does the child bring it out? Because a child is pure in emunah. A child is pure in bitachon. To teach us what? That's how we ought to live. Not to say you shouldn't do ishtadlut. Not to say that you shouldn't put an effort. Not to say that you shouldn't try and do everything you can to succeed. But to understand the outcome is not on us. Why, how, what, where, when, why? We'll understand later. By Eliyahu Navi, when we go and drink the fifth cup. By Eliyahu. By Tzafun, when it's hidden. That which is hidden is the things that we struggle with. There's a mice in the Gemara of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda, he had a sick son. And he's trying to pray for his kid to get better, but it's not working. So he asks his student, Rav Chanina ben Dosa. He says, Rav Chanina, my student, you go and pray for my child to go get better. And he does. And Rabbi Yehuda's wife asks him, he says, I don't understand. You're his rabbi. You're greater than him. How is it that you're asking your student to go and pray for the health of our child? What's going on over here? So Rabbi Yehuda answers his wife like this. He says, you see, me, I'm like a prince lifnei HaMelech. I'm like royalty lifnei HaMelech. Me and Hashem, I'm in the upper chambers. Rav Chanina ben Dosa, he's like a servant. He's like a slave lifnei HaMelech. Now let me ask you, who's on a higher level, the prince or the servant? For sure the prince. But who has more access to Hashem? If a prince wants a meeting with the king, he's got to schedule it. Knock on the door, make sure he's scheduled in, he's got an appointment. The slave, the servant, can walk in whenever he wants. Yeah, move the feet, go dust the armchair, enter and exit, it's a free reign. Whatever he wants. That's the servant. He says, Rav Chanina, he's like the servant. I understand why my child is sick. I'm like the king, I'm on a higher level, I get it, I don't ask questions. But he's a servant who accepts blindly. And so therefore his tefillot are more accepted. When a servant enters the throne room, he's coming in with perfect emunah. He's coming with perfect bitachon. I live a life understanding that there are questions, and with these questions, even though I don't have the answers, this is the life I choose to lead. You look back at the Kli Yakar. He could have thrown in the towel and said, this is not for me. Not a life that I need to live. But what do we say? Tizaru min ha'aniyim, from those who are poor. Lechem oni is coming and teaching us this one thing and one thing alone, or many things, but among them with this one thing. That even though we don't know, and we are represented in this matzah, the matzah that is called ani, the matzah that's called poor, because it's lacking knowledge, that is exactly the key to Geula. The Geula is not only told when we have the chafa matzah, and that's what it is, but to understand that it's only part of a whole. And at the end, we'll know. At the end, when everything comes full circle, we'll know why things were the way they were. Moshe Rabbeinu asks this famous question. He asks Hashem, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do the wicked suffer? We think in our generation, we ask this question first. Moshe Rabbeinu, he asks Hashem himself. And what does Hashem answer Moshe? He says, V'lo ra'ani adam v'chai. He says that no person can understand my ways and live. That's what he says. And he shows Moshe the dalid of Hashem's tefillin. Hashem shows Moshe Hashem's tefillin. Now, first question, Hashem wears tefillin, he wears tefillin. Whatever that means, that's what it means. But what does it mean to show him his tefillin? If you ever look at the way the tefillin work, you see that there's a box in the head, and there's a strap that goes around. And it culminates in a dalid in the back of the head. And then from this dalid, there are two straps. He's telling Moshe this beautiful chidush. He's saying like this. He's saying that if you look at me from the front, you'll see that the straps, they're going down. The left strap's on the left, the right strap's on the right. He says, but look at me from the back. He says, if you look at me from the back, you'll see the knot. And on the knot, everything crosses. What you think is up is really down. And what you think is down is really up. You want to understand my ways? Look at me from the back. Look at me from after it happened. Maybe you'll get a glimpse. Maybe you'll be zochet to understand why that happened in the way it needed to. And if we think back in our lives to why things were the way they were, I'm sure we could think of, wow, I'm here today because that happened. Because this was the way it was, because I met this person in this time in my life, because this opportunity didn't go through or it fell through, I'm here today and I'm stronger because of it. But to understand why, we'll understand at the end. And I'll give a story. The story happened in 1976. A man, his name was Yehuda. And Yehuda, he was a man who was just under his luck. Couldn't hold down a job. He was trying to support his family in the best way that he could. He was trying to go and make ends meet. And he said, you know what, finally, I have an opportunity. I'm going to go to this company. I'm going to go to this very wealthy man. Maybe he's going to offer me something. And he's going in his car and he's driving down the highway and he's telling over the story. He says, maybe this is going to be the deal that's going to secure me. This is going to be the deal that I'm going to be able to support my family with. And he's going on the highway and traffic hits like a traffic that has never been before. Longer than the TSA lines in all the airports today. Right? Traffic all the way down across the highway from LaGuardia all the way to JFK. And he's going, and 1 hour goes by. And 2 hours goes by. And he said, I have my meeting in 20 minutes. Third hour goes by. 4th hour, 5th hour, he's 6 hours late, and he's still on the highway. Comes to a point, he's like, you know what? I missed the meeting. It's pouring rain. It's the middle of the night. I have nowhere to go. I have to use the bathroom. So he pulls over. He's looking for a place that he can enter. He stops and knocks. They don't answer. He goes, he stops, he knocks. They don't answer. He says, "Yishtabach Shemo, you took this opportunity away from me. I'm just trying to support my family in any which way I can. But things are not going my way." Finally, he sees a home. It's a funeral home. And he knocks. And they enter. They allow him entrance into the funeral home. And he sees at that moment, there's actually a hesped, there's a levaya. Someone had just passed away. There's 4 people waiting in the crowd. And he walks in. And he says, "Listen, is it okay if I use the restroom?" Go ahead. "Yeah, go ahead and go do what you got to do. It's fine." He goes, uses the bathroom. And the director of the funeral home, he says, "Listen, but sir, excuse me, before you leave, could you just please sign the sign-in book?" And he says, "Yeah, I don't even know who this is." Like, he says, No, that's a rule. You enter the funeral home, you have to put your sign-in book, put your name, put your number, and that's what it is. Okay, fine, whatever. He puts down his name, he scribbles down his name, puts down his phone number, and that's what it was. A few weeks go by, he gets a phone call. And this phone call says, "Hello, is this Yehuda so-and-so?" He says, "Yeah, it is." He says, "I'm calling from the funeral home. We saw that you signed your name in the sign-in sheet. You signed your name in the book." And he says, "Oh yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, I signed my name." And he says, "We just wanted to let you know that the man who passed away was a very, very wealthy man. And he decided to not give over his inheritance to any one of his family, but to split it amongst those who came to the funeral of himself. He said, you were one of the 5 names and you're inheriting 20% of his wealth. We'd like to wire you down $3 million. And he's jumping for joy. He asked questions. Why did this happen? What's going on? He didn't know the end of the story. But look at the way the wheel of fortune turned. But now I want to reveal something to you. Usually when I end the class, I end with a story to tie it all in. This story that I just told you, it's a lie. It's an urban legend. I looked it up, I did research, I fact-checked. It's not true. It's not a story that's true. But I guarantee that all of our hearts in this room want it so bad for it to be true. We wanted it to be true because we want to know that in this life, we will see what that end of the story is. We want to see the conclusion of the movie while we're alive. And I know that we hoped that that story was real. But just because that story is not real, just because it's a mashal, doesn't mean that we can't get the satisfaction knowing that God's in control. That even if we don't know the end of our story, and we don't know why we're struggling, and why things are the way they are, and we may never know until Latid Lavo, after we pass, after 120, when Mashiach comes, we should understand that the Seder is all of our lives. And at the very end, the truth will be revealed. When Safun comes at the end, that which is hidden is shown, we realize that all of our pains, all of our suffering, all the struggles that we go through on a day-to-day basis, it's not because it's pain intrinsically, but it's because we're looking at the story as a half. We're not looking at the full picture. We're not looking exactly really what it's meant to be. In the middle of our story, we're writing it now. We're drawing that, we're painting that painting. We're drawing that drawing. And when we step away, it might look bad. But after a long enough time, in the fullness of time, when we look back, like Hashem says, Moshe, look at me from the back. And we look back and we say, look at the family I built. Look at the home that I was able to raise. Look at the Torah that I was able to give over. Look at the person that I was able to become because I sacrificed a little bit. Adam ki yakriv mikem korban ladonai. It's to understand that we are Adam. Adameh le'elyon. To recognize that within all of us, we have that missing piece. It's only a matter of will we take that step forward and look forward and try and do to be the best person that we can, or say, you know what, I'm happy with the half a matzah that I have now, and this is the matzah that's going to lead my life. Which one is going to lead our life? The afikoman that comes at the end, or the matzah that we break in the beginning? We should be zocheh that this year in Pesach, we all go through our own geulah pratit, that all of us comes to discover who we really are inside. And you know, people say, what if I fail? What if I don't succeed? And you know what I always tell them? But what if you do? But what if you make it? But what if it works? We're so quick to say, what if it doesn't? But what if we say, what if it does? What if we say, what if I actually land the deal? And I actually make the investment? And it works out? Then what? We should be zocheh to train our minds, to train ourselves, to recognize our story does have an end. To seek it like a burning desire and to grow to the best possible versions of ourselves. Hazak Baruch.